westward we go toward the last buffalo. To the high plains.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can't stand for real long periods of time, but up here on the stage where I can kind of sit and everything, and plus I can see my notes, so I get confused. Tom Moxley was a previous presenter here, and he gave me some advice for my talk. He said to just follow 3 simple rules: have a great introduction, a great conclusion, and have them close together. And Lynn said she got a number of comments about me being the speaker, but she didn't go into specific detail about what those comments were, but we can find out later. But yes, and I am Richard Porter, and I am honored to speak here, and especially the place that's the legacy of Wayne Rogler. And Wayne had many fantastic qualities, but one of them was his ability to bring people together, to look for common ground, not confrontation. I remember when the Prairie National Park 50, 60 years ago was a huge controversy about, most of the ranchers did not want it, and some other people, did. And Wayne had asked me my opinion of it, about the situation, and I was of the 3% that was in fact, that thought it could be okay if it didn't get, too large. And I spoke before I really thought, because many times that would just elicit a very negative response. But from Wayne, he listened and he tried to draw me out. And Wayne, this important lesson from Wayne Rogler, he would listen to other people as if something they said might change his mind, as if something they said would be new information. I think in today's day and age of the confrontation, that's a great lesson from Wayne Rogler. Dave Kendall did a fantastic job of an hour-and-a-half movie about the Prairie National Park as it came on, and Tallgrass, and he treated both sides with total fairness, and had people that had actually changed their mind over time. So I think just in today's day and age of looking at how can we find solutions as opposed to how can we find confrontations, there's a couple of great examples of Wayne Rogler and the Prairie National Park. And Pioneer Bluff carrying it on, it does a fantastic job here, and it needs your support. Cottonwood Falls, Bazaar, Matfield Green, we're right down in here. My location is halfway between Emporia and Topeka, right up here at the Admire exit. We'll go to the next slide. I did not trust myself multitasking, so Lynn was kind enough to advance for me. Okay, so this is just going up the Kansas Turnpike, and this is the Admire exit, 56 Highway and the Kansas Turnpike, and the town of Miller's the landmark. This is our headquarters, and smaller feedlot here, larger feedlot, and our calf starting area. And our pictures will zero in on that, because that's one of the hubs of what we do. And the operation, operate about 13,000 acres, and there's 2,600 acres of farmland, which is in the river bottom here, and it's hauled into our silo. And in the dead of winter, we feed the cattle in the 2 feedlots. The corn silage and the manure can just go right back out to the fields. Having things close in has really aided us. And then also our pastures, one large area here, another large area up in here, and some pastures on down here. And so our grazing deal is a little bit different. We normally feed the cattle, about 25% of their diet is wet distillers fed 6 days a week. And this allows us to buy cattle 10 months out of the year, and not have to buy cattle and have them all ready to go on grass on the 1st of May. So it allows us to buy these cattle cheaper, and in our operation, or stocker operator, buy little calves that average weighing about 350 pounds when they come in, and we take them up to 850. We used to finish the cattle at home and go to Emporia, but when they closed down the slaughter at Emporia, we had to readjust and sell the cattle as feeders at about $8.50. And these are very high risk calves. They're bought one at a time to collect together a load down in Georgia and Kentucky. And when they had the trip and the castration and the arrival, they're not exposed to other diseases. And it's the bad news is, there's significant health challenges. The good news is they're discounted because of that. And I'll get into a little bit later in my talk. We have some specialized facilities to try to address that. And go to the next one, Lynn. There. Okay, so this is the main feedlot, about 4,000 head feedlot, and then this is our calf starting area. And what we have here is there are 16 pens, and each has 300 foot of bunk and about 15 or 10 acres of grass trap. And going north here, there's 4 bunks, both sides would be 8 pens, and there's 8 of these grass traps out here the cattle can go out on. And then on the roadway driving up here, you can kind of make out the lines there. So there's 4 pens to a side times 2 is 8, plus the 8 up here is about 16 pens. And what we try to do out of this is for the cattle are only in a tight pen for about 3 hours a day, and when they're fed in the morning and to be observed, and then they're out on the grass traps. And so when it's cold and wet, the cattle can be out on the grass and not up in a small tight pen. In the summertime, that also helps out because they're not standing on the bare dirt. So we can go on to the next one there. And this just if I hold this more, if you can't hear, holler out if I'm either talking too loud or too soft here. And this is just a close-up of it. And these are the pie-shaped pens. And you can see out of this, it makes it very easy for us to put cattle into the pens and to make pulls to come back out. And then going down the roadway here is also pens. And some of the concept out of this was similar to a Tom Moxley rented operation from Rockefeller's down in Arkansas. And some of the concepts there is what I adopted here. So going to the next one there. Okay, this is just a picture of looking up the road at the main hub where we just were at. And you can see a mailbox here, and that will help you reference the next one. Okay, next one, Lynn. Okay, here's the mailbox. And so the view up this direction to the right would be up the top. A too-high unloading chute. And one of the reasons for the too-high unloading chute is my cattle buyer would many times, he would have several loads of cattle, 3/4 of a load, 80% of a load. And so he would just finish off the load with cattle for me. So I might get a truckload of cattle on 4 or even 5 different truckloads of cattle. The truck would come in and unload at 4 o'clock in the morning and go on so he could unload his the rest of his load at 7 o'clock when people wanted to observe them. And so we don't go up to unload the cattle. There's a mailbox that the trucker puts the paperwork in there. If there's an animal that was down or dead, he makes a mark on it. We've never had an issue with being short on count or anything like that. It's just one of the things that was easier for us and offered a service to them. And later on, I'll be talking about long-term relationships and how important these are for an operation, and really making it work for the other side. And for 25 years, probably 95% of my cattle have come from just 2 cattle buyers. And to get 1 or 2 loads of cattle a week from them, just 9-10 months out of the year. And so being able to accommodate them on with that too-high unloading chute. And when that was built, Yotzel Benedict built it for us, and weren't real sure on the design for it, but he had and he started it, and then he changed it. And then I was trying to understand where are we going to load the goosenecks and the floor trailers, or the gooseneck trailers for loading off the ground. And something with communication, he and we were not tracking But I knew him. He'd done a lot of projects for us, and so I said, "You just go ahead and build it. I'm sure it'll be okay." And it wasn't until he had it built that it soaked into me that the truck did not, the gooseneck did not back up the same way that the pots did, the semis did, but came in at a 90-degree angle. And so for some reason, he and I were not able to communicate, but I had enough track record with him. Go ahead and build it. I knew things would work out, and it did. So, but it's an aspect of working with people long term. Yeah, this just shows up at our main cattle processing area, and just one little tidbit about what we did here was we have hydraulic sorting gates, and all it is that's these lines going out, and just a little simple 3x8 cross cylinder opens and shuts. There's 7 different gates, and so when we have cattle in the chute, we know the weight and which way they go. They flip it, so they flip the hydraulic lever and such, and so you already have the hydraulics from the chute there. So it just made a real simple way to do it. Testing, yeah, okay. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, just a squeeze chute and computer for the records and such. Next slide. And then this is just a shot going in our main feed lot, and the 4,000 head lot. Got a similar one, about 2,000 by the headquarters, and we'd built it when we were finishing the cattle there at home, and now we only use it for 3 to 4 months out of the year, but you couldn't sell it for anything, so it's nice to have. Okay, next one, Lynn. Okay, we all know what type of winter we had, and this is just one of the pens, and piled the manure. Hopefully it'll shrink down as it dries a little bit, and then hauled back in the clay, and got fantastic crew of employees, and I'll be discussing that a little bit more later. And we had the clay and the equipment and the people, and when they had an opportunity between times, they started in on the pens to get the manure piled and then haul the base back in. But we lost more base in the feedlot this last winter than we probably lost the previous 10 years in a row, but that was just life. With this, when we have cattle in the feedlot, from typically they're on grass except till Thanksgiving, and then they're in the pens from November, December, essentially December, January, February, and a little bit into March. And 3 pounds a day of gain has just been standard for a number of years on corn silage, and about 22% distillers. This last year it was about 1.5 to 1.8, with everything else being the same other than the weather. So that's just one of the situations you have to deal with. Go ahead. Now that's me in my usual position, and from the employees, and then the next slide's the last one. Yeah, and me standing there, and a stray dog showed up a couple months ago, and showed up at the noon hour, and we were able to track down who his owner was, and he'd moved to town, didn't really want the dog, and said it's yours. And so told the dog he's glad to stay, but he was going to have to be neutered and get his shots, and he said that's okay with me. So we're looking for a home for him, or we'll hang on to him there. And could I trouble you to go back to about the map number 3, and then we'll just leave that on. Yeah, there. Yeah, that'd be fine. And won't do too much. And again, this is just our calf starting area where it goes out, kind of like you see a lot of purebred people would have, and then the feedlot there. And so we'll just leave that up there. So. Keeping with following Tom Moxley's advice here, make sure on the timing here. So yeah, you bet. just a little bit on kind of the history of our operation. Lynn was kind enough to give me 3 DVDs of previous speakers and from them, and my history is probably a little bit shorter than others, but basically 3 to 4 generations back of ancestors, most of them came as immigrants, and our grandparents, my sister Jane Murphy, she's in the back of the room somewhere, so I can't make too much up, or if I do make stuff up, somebody can correct me. And then I've got a number of other good friends here that will be my fact checker. So in any event, our grandparents. Oh, fact checker, very good. And Charlie, will you be scoring me on an ongoing basis, or at the end you give me a score?
It'll be a moving average.
It'll be a moving average. Oh, okay, yeah. And many of you know Charlie, and he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam and shot down 3 times and survived all 3 of them, and we appreciate your service. But our grandparents, my sister Jane and I, my grandparents, they kind of came of age during the Depression and were pretty well knocked out financially. In standpoint, one had a bank, the other was farming in northwest Kansas in the Dust Bowl and the Depression. It was tough, but had a wonderful family for our parents to grow up in, and the grandparents, they valued education, and our parents were both teachers, and they met teaching at Junction City, Kansas, and then when they married, they moved to Council Grove, southwest of Council Grove, about 2.5 miles, where my dad's relatives had some land, and my dad was lucky enough to teach World War II veterans, and he said that it was fantastic to teach because the veterans, when it was great weather for being out in the fields planting and haying and such, they didn't want anything to do with my dad, but when it was wet and they couldn't do anything else, that was when they wanted to do their stuff, which allowed my dad to go ahead and be farming there on the at the same time that he was teaching. And he said, you never really know a topic until you teach it, and such. And he said he learned both from the material so that he could present it, but also from the students and from the students' parents. And that was he considered that a great start in his life. And the first land he bought was 2 years before I was born, in 1948. And he bought a tract of land which Tom Moxley now owns. And by 10 years later, in 1958, he had put together 500 acres, but it was scattered, and there was no location for a headquarters to put in cattle pens and grain bins and such. And so he was looking for an operation that was maybe 1,000 acres in one location that would have a chance to expand from, but already had some cattle pens. It looked at a lot of different operations, but just nothing fit. And then they looked at one that was 5,000 acres. He was at 500 acres, and it was too big of a step, he thought, but his banker really believed in him. And so Dad went ahead and leaped in, figured if it didn't work out, he could always go back to teaching. And we live in a great country and opportunity where if something does not work out, you can go ahead and make a living. And he needed 3 good years of markets and weather to be able to hang on to that big of a step, and they got it. And my parents were very modest about their accomplishments. They said it could easily have turned out differently. And I'll talk a little bit on my story when I came back to the ranch, and things could have easily turned out differently. So, there's a lot to be, sometimes things will work out great for factors beyond our control. And my dad said a big predictor of if a person was going to make it or not make it in agriculture was the year they were born, because typically in their 30s when they made their big push, and if they're making their big push in a time when there's a big, the Great Depression or the 80s in the United States, it may not work out as well. And my history, I grew up knowing I'd never farm. There's the only thing I didn't know for sure what I'd do, but it was nothing but long hours of brutally hard work for no pay. And so I went to K-State and got a degree in chemical engineering. And at the end of that, I was kind of enjoying being a student too much, and so I didn't really want to give up the student life. So I went on to law school. And my sister had also gone through law school, so I figured, I think I'll go ahead and do that too. And had a good time. And then and so out of law school, I went to work for Bethlehem Steel in eastern Pennsylvania, and my folks came to visit me, and my dad was again hitting me up about coming back and joining him in the ranch and carrying on, and it was the last thing in the world I'd ever do. And so we're sitting there, my parents and my wife and I, and Dad just pointedly asked, he said, "What's the company paying you anyway?" Well, a little bit abrupt question, but I gave him an answer, and my dad scowled and said, "Son, you need to look for a different job." And I said, "Dad, that's a pretty good salary." My dad said, "That's what I mean. Any company that pay you that type of salary won't be in business very long." A true story, and little did I know that he was correct. That Bethlehem Steel, that they did not have cost under control. They were the number 2 steel maker in the United States, but in a few years they got kicked off of being one of the 30 blue chip companies that make up the Dow. And then they got completely kicked off the stock exchange, and the company ended up being no more. And I left before the demise, and hope I did not contribute to it too much. But I was there for 4 years, and in '79, my dad again hit me up about coming back to the farm. And most of you look like you're old enough to kind of know what, if somebody talks about the 1970s or 1980s or what was going on in those years. The 70s were fantastic, glory years. Land prices, cattle, grain prices were just going up like a rocket, and had every reason to believe that they would continue to increase. And came back, we had that first good year, and then went through the 80s. And going through the 80s was probably the greatest experience for me. We had enough base that we did manage to hang on. My dad was very sharp and such, but we found ways to be cost effective. You could just, you couldn't be careless. You had to find cost effective ways to do things to go ahead and make it on through. And I kept kind of thinking, I was young, kind of kept thinking, well, this is just one more year, a tough year, and kind of we kept buying land, expanding the feedlots and everything. And then, fortunately, after 10 years, it turned around, and everything turned out well. But in hindsight, it took probably a bigger chances than I probably should have, but it did work out. But there's certainly no guarantee about it, and so one has to be pretty humble, when you do make it, and of realizing that it could have turned out differently. And that's why I'm glad to help fund a number of different charities and organizations and such. Now, J. Paul Getty, oil man, one time he was the richest man in the world, and he said that for success in life required 3 things: get up early in the morning, work hard all day. Third one, strike oil. And at first I thought, hey, that's pretty cute. But I got to thinking about that, and really, there's a huge amount of truth to that before you're going to strike oil, you had to get up early and work hard all day. You had to put in the effort to try to stack the deck in your ways, stack the deck in your favor, but there's no guarantee. And things may not turn out, but unless you are putting in the effort, you're not going to have the chance of drawing that luck. And Dad and I, we were together for 25 years, and many father-son deals, there's strain because the father's too slow in turning things over, and Dad turned things over to me maybe a lot faster than I almost would have liked. And when I'd be asking him questions, now we'd chat on things, but I'd say, well, which way should I do it? And Dad said, son, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. It's time for you to start making some of your own mistakes. And so, but it was a great relationship. He and I, to have a father and son share a life, 25 years, carry on his ranch, and it was fantastic. And we got along fantastic in all regards except burning pastures. And my dad thought that if he didn't have a half-mile flame front out of control, he wasn't doing a good enough job of lighting pastures. And back 40, 50 years ago, I think we've known of several ranchers around here, and ranchers and their sons that had kind of the same dilemma. They got along well, except on burning pastures. But if you can get through that one, I guess everything else you can make out. And one little kind of secret that worked out, I think my dad was the one that kind of figured this out, was, we knew we were both could be fairly stubborn and determined, and we weren't going to have to get together on every decision, and only a few very key ones, but in general, there'd be a situation we were going to be rebuilding a fence or trading a piece of equipment or buying a tract of land or what have you, and to say, you or me. And so one of us was in charge of that task and would confer with the other one, but we didn't need to keep running to the other one for everything. We didn't have to reach agreement. If we were traveling through town and where we were going to stop for lunch, we could have a 30-minute debate and argument about where we were going to eat lunch. And so it would be traveling on a business trip and hitting a town and say, you pick or me, and Dad said, well, I'll pick this time. And said, well, that cafe right there, we'll go there. So I'd pull in. And there's no need to have a discussion about the merits of the different cafes. One guy picked, you jumped in and did it. Same thing with many things on the farm. And so rather than having, and this is particularly important when you get 3 or 4 family members and they all have to get together and come to agreement, you get a lot of time can be wasted. And if they can just say they're going to designate a person to make the call, the others give their input, but they charge on forward on it. And in running the operation there, the operation, very fortunate, sister get along great, so her land, both her share of my parents' land and some land that she bought, rent that from her, and so that works great, a very stable relationship. And then kind of that little bit more in our operation, we have 3 great kids. None of them are interested in farming, and so it may either end after me, or my sister's got two great grandsons, and they're growing up fast. So you never know, what might happen there. But only about 30% of the operations, be it ranches or businesses, successfully transition from one generation to the next. And I tell myself, if others hadn't sold land to us, we wouldn't have had the chance to grow and operate like we're at. And when I'm 6 feet underground, my descendants, they can make a decision on what they do there with the operation and everything. And people will see the size of our operation and ask, do you own or rent most of that land? And I said, on this earth, we're all tenant farmers. The only difference is some tenant farmers have to pay property tax. And so for sometimes people can have their chest puffed out too much. If I own this, I own that. Well, these Flint Hills have been here for hundreds of thousands of years and be here for hundreds of thousands of years after us. So we do have an obligation not to seriously damage them, not to plow them up or do anything that would be long-term damage, because we're just tenant farmers. We're here custodians for this beautiful Flint Hills for our lifetime, and then it'll be somebody else. So, yeah. I might circle back to just a little bit of our operation, and then I'll kind of open it up both questions and interactions and stuff, and I'll have some more material to kind of can go over, but we can kind of respond to things that you guys have. When I talked about J. Paul Getty and about get up early and work hard and then strike oil, and you're trying to increase the chances of hitting oil. Well, you're playing the odds, and so if you walked into a casino and there were slot machines that would pay for every dollar you put in, they'd pay back $1.10, another one would pay back 90 cents. Well, you wouldn't put money in the ones that return 90 cents, but you'd be stuffing bills as fast as you could into the ones that return $1.10. So we don't know what's going to happen on the weather and on the markets, and I think it's important not to try to outguess what's going to happen on the weather or markets. But do look at the futures markets. That's the best predictor we have of where markets will be 6 months from now or a year and a half from now. But if I knew any more than that market, than that price is on my screen, I'd be trading commodity futures rather than out farming. So it's kind of the reality check. When I'm buying calves, you're constantly looking at, okay, I look at, okay, what's the futures market 8 months from now when I'll be selling the animal at $8.50, adjusted by the historic basis, and does it make sense to buy the calf or not? And if it makes sense, I'm buying. If it makes huge sense, I buy hard. And if it's going to be a loss, you just shut down and don't buy, or buy very slow. And resist the temptation of, well, I like to buy cattle in the spring, or I like to do this, and the market ought to go up $100. Well, you're playing the odds, and if you think you know more than the futures market, just stay in your office and trade commodity futures. And I don't know too many people who have been a successful strategy of that. So you're constantly trying to stack the odds they're in your favor, and everything. Yeah. What I consider one of the most important things for success in life in general is the very productive long-term relationships. And my silage cutters, the phrase is, can you put your hands up? They're in the back of the room right over here. And they've been cutting our silage for 35 years. Well, in fact, on this aerial photos, this picture was taken when they had opened up our fields. They cut around the outside edge, and then crop insurance gets a measurement, and then they come back and cut the rest of it. So there's a mark of my silage cutters here. But in any event, they I guess I'll just go ahead and give the story here, how we got connected with them. We had our own silage cutters, and we cut our own silage cutters and trucks. And neighbors, the Briggs is about 6 miles south of us. They used custom cutters, and it was the phrases. The people are at the back of the room. And they got about 3-4 inches of rain at our neighbors, and we'd hardly gotten anything. And so they were shut down. The custom crew was shut down. And so I went down, and I said to them, hey, where you guys are shut down for about 3 days, would you like to come up and cut silage on me at 2/3 your normal rate? And they said no. I said fine. I started to walk off, and they said, no, we don't want to, but we will. And they came up and they cut silage for about 3-4 days till it dried off down there at the neighbors. Next year, virtually the identical thing happened again. I went down and said, would you want to? No, we don't want to, but we will. When they got done, when they got done and we were able to go back to them, I said, and for selling up with them, I paid them the full rate. And kind of like, what's going on? I said, hey, seeing what you guys can do here, I can't compete with you. With my own cutters on my own land, you can put it up cheaper than I can. Next year, I want you guys to come up and cut, all of our silage, and I'll pay you at your normal rate. And so that's Waldo, Larry. How many years ago? 30 some.
Yeah, something like that.
35 years that they've cut all of our silage. And after a couple years, we never even talk rate. And somebody will ask us, well, what do they charge? I said, I don't know. And so they'd cut 800 acres of silage and truck it into our pit, and we'd never talk because I knew things would be okay. But that was these long-term productive relationships. When I came back to the operation, we finished our cattle out in commercial feedlots. We buy very plain, ugly cattle that if you finish them, you get about even money. We try to buy cattle well below average price. We try to grow them well below average cost of gain and sell close to even money. And if finish, you could. And after about 10 years of being back, got to thinking, man, they kill 4,000 head of cattle a day at Emporia, my county seat. I think we can do it at home, and with the Tyson right there, with the packing plant right there, we quickly found ways that both Tyson and myself could make an extra $25 a head. We deliver cattle first thing Monday morning when they had the highest need for cattle. And the first 2 years with Tyson, it was the classic confrontation between the cattle feeder and the packer, and just pounding heads. And let me tell you, IBP Tyson, they had a lot harder head than I did. And I had to sell about half my cattle from out to Garden City, competitor Garden City, or up to Omaha, just because they'd pay, the closer you were to Emporia, the less they paid you. And then, I won't bore you with the details, they had a couple little deals come up that we found a way to make it work with them, and we went from having to sell half my cattle to a competitor and haul them 200 miles to keep my packer 25 miles away competitive, to where we didn't even talk price. And it was just, you know, I'd be chatting with them of, hey, I'd like to go with 300 head, 400 head in the next couple weeks, and when would work for you? And usually about every couple weeks, go with about 300 head. And we just kind of talking on schedule, or they'd call at me of, hey, can we pull a load early? We should have a real need on Monday, or sometimes it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And so, boom, we'd ship them, we'd deliver the cattle. Am I doing okay on volume? I hear it's changing. If anybody has trouble, just let me know. But anyway, we would deliver the cattle, $250,000 worth of cattle, and they would be killed, and I wouldn't have a clue what the price was going to be until I got the check. So I mean that's trust. I mean where it made it work for both people. Banks, Frontier Farm Credit, they've been fantastic. We only changed banks one time, and that was the Frontier Farm Credit. Oh, and I need to give credit for the 8 slides that had pictures of stuff. Henry Ott, Frontier Farm Credit, they had me give a talk down there a few weeks ago, and so they wanted some pictures. I said, I don't have any pictures of the operation. He came up and shot pictures, and so I utilized his pictures here, and such. Mills Tire, I mean, they're not a salesman. They don't have salesmen, they have tire consultants, and they know they're going to get all of my business. And so without me having to lean on them, I know they're going to be competitive on price. Many other fine tire stores, many other fine banks besides Frontier Farm Credit. We've got along great there. We've got a full service country elevator a mile from my headquarters. Well, it'd be rather silly for me to be trying to lean on them when any place else is going to be 20, 30, 40 miles away. So it's trying to find a way to make it work for the other people, and certainly with the employees. And Paul Hedberg and Paula, they're here. Put your hand up, Paul. Yeah, he's been with us 35 years, probably. And when we'll say that, and Paul will say, "Gosh, it seems a lot longer than that to me." But been fantastic. Been my foreman for probably 30 of those years, and such. And I tell people, you do not treat employees great as if they're do not treat people great as if they're your most important resource. Treat people great because they are your most important resource. And if you're larger than what you can do yourself, you're going to need employees, and to really make it work. And that's about 6-7 years ago, we had a change at our place, and we exited some people that were just intentionally confrontational, and raised the salary on the remaining people. And I said, you know, I'm not asking you to work any harder, just don't be constantly causing drama, don't be constantly stirring things up. And wow, do we ever get more done? It probably should have happened earlier. So you really want to treat people great, but be willing to say, hey, this situation is not working, be it with a vendor or employee or even a neighbor. You find out you can't even work with a neighbor. Well, you can't fire the neighbor, but you can say, okay, here's the fence line. You know, I'll stay on my side and you can stay on yours. So, but you're constantly want to be looking for how can we both benefit, or we're going to work separately and everything. So now I'd like to kind of open it up for some interaction. And I've got if you're slow in questions, I've got a little bit more info I'll go with. But go ahead. Does anybody have anything particularly they refer for me? Yes. in the early 1980s, when we came back, the prime rate went to, I believe, 21.5%. Our bank was able to do some things, I think 17, 18% in the 1980s. But yeah.
Isn't that what caused a lot of farmers?
Oh, it did, yes. The high interest rates, and I mean, it was probably been more likely than not that our operation might not have made it. But Dad was very sharp and such, and CRP came on, and we put half our land into CRP, and we did not have enough equipment to farm the land we had, and we were able to put half of it, the worst half, the furthest away half. But yeah, that 21.5%. And there's concern the interest rates have moved up slightly, and if they moved anything to historic levels, the debt load would be tougher. But I think 21.5% was on the prime, and I think the actual cost was 18 or so. Yeah, but yeah, that was brutal. Yes.
Where do most of your calves come in from?
Georgia and Kentucky, and that's not only because we have a person in Georgia that his name is Doris Louise Barrett and such, but he and I hit it off, and where he's in the sale barns buying normal cattle, he's able to go ahead and pick up these cattle that are missing tails or a little bit of a bad eye. But it's that long-term, it'd be hundreds of different cattle buyers, but him, and there's another one in Kentucky, a Marshall Seltzer, that we will utilize. And they're long haul, and they come from small operations. They didn't have vaccine. They probably were not vaccinated. They weren't castrated, and so there's a health challenge. And on the one hand, the health has gotten worse even over the last 2 years. But on the other hand, the market has discounted. But but it's finding a situation that would people you can work with, you can trust, because when they unload the cattle, you can't inspect them when they step off the truck, because 2/3 of them look like you need to reject them and such. But that's kind of our operation, because if we take them up to finish, we can get equal with the market. Bring them up to 850 pounds, we can get close to average price and try to have lower costs. And then also on working with people, when they close Tyson and Emporia, we sell most of our cattle at Emporia Sale Barn, and we go down on Monday for a Wednesday sale. And they've got time, and they go through and sort our cattle into about 3 or 4 selling outcome groups, and about 8 or 10% of the cattle that they consider, too ugly, or they're not going to bring a decent price or bring too much of a discount. The last truck down brings those reject cattle back, and then we take them at up to about 1,000, 950, 1,000, and put them in a commercial feedlot. And they bring not only even money, I think the last 8 in a row have brought a premium. A lot of the ones that came back to us, it was because they were squatty. They were smaller frame size, and you'd end up with a lot of primes out of those, and that actually bring a premium. So it's kind of a neat operation in terms of that we would, that 10% that was rejected, you'd still go ahead and get a full selling price out of. And so people will say there's other sale barns have a lower commission rate than Emporia, and for my volume, they would give us a discount. I say, hey, that's fine. At Emporia, there's both. They know my cattle. They know the buyers. They listen to the buyers, and they say, hey, on Porter's cattle, we prefer to have more of this type and less of that type, so they sort them up for that. So everything's a straight-up deal at Emporia Sale Barn for me, for the cattle, and the people buying the cattle. And what's important, I'm not trying to fleece anybody, because there's only a few buyers out there. It's a long-term deal, and it just works great for me. Many other great sales. I'm making a pitch for Farm Credit or Emporia Sale Barn, but it's somebody you found that makes it work, and they are the closest, so there's the least transportation cost and stress there on the animals and everything. So, but again, it's a long-term relationship, and then all of our cattle are finished in the same feedlot out there at Moles. So yeah, good question. Yes. And trying to buy the little local cattle, there's normally health issues with them. One, they tend to be, if they're weigh 300, 350 pounds, there's normally health issues associated with them. That's why they're smaller, and they normally bring a higher price than what I can get for these cattle further out. And so I had in the past, and perhaps I might want to consider that, but normally when you're buying the smaller, thin cattle, there's a higher percent chance that you're going to have an issue with it. But I hadn't really looked at it for a number of years. I appreciate you saying something. I might have to reconsider buying the local cattle. But when we're buying, most cattle sell at 450, 500, and we're buying 350, and they're virtually all bulls, which discounts them. And most people around here do a lot better job, and you're not probably going to have these plain little bulls. So, but I probably need to relook at it. But good question. Moles, Pawnee Rock, it's just beyond Garden City, and then was at a different lot they had south of Salina. And there's many excellent finishing feedlots, but Moles and Glenn Mole was a colleague, well, he's my pledge son, fraternity house, and his dad, Keith, and my dad were good friends, and so we just put all of our cattle into the Moles feedlot, and they're part of the ILS group that has a good marketing grid. But there's a number of great feedlots, but kind of like cattle buyers or the Emporia Sale Barn or my bank, we started with these people, and it's a long-term relationship. They know they're going to have my cattle. They don't have to do any salesmanship. But there's many good feedlots and everything. But it's Mole Cattle Company, I believe. Mole Feedlots is where we finish them. But there's probably others that could do equally well. But that's where we've built up the interaction and everything. So yeah.
Do you feel you have a good understanding of the futures market?
I think I had the same understanding anybody else would. You look at the screen and it says December fat cattle or feeder cattle or this price. I know with certainty that I cannot outguess where that market's going, but it gives me a prediction of where the price is going. And then I might give a little aside about hedging cattle. And the people that seem to get into trouble, in my opinion, is people that think they know more than the market. They'll jump in and hedge all their cattle or close out all the hedges, and because they think they know what the market's going to do, or even worse, Texas hedge, where they take a future position, but it's the opposite of what would protect them and such. And it seems like the people who have been successful are ones that normally have a relatively consistent policy of either hedging nothing or 50% or 80% or 100%, and kind of stay with it. But when people start jumping in and out, thinking they know more than what's on the futures market, that tends to cause more problems. That's just my observation of 40 years. I've only known of a few that could consistently, predict on it and everything. But so and then of course you have to adjust it by your expectation on basis and everything. So yeah. But
what percentage of your 350-pound calves die on you?
it is a significant number. I may not give a number here. You can come up to me after this, and I can give you a number. But there's a significant number. But it's we're still making money at it. But it has, for the entire industry, especially over the last 2 to 4 years, it has moved up, and even for good cattle that are preconditioned, and a lot of theories as to why, and we don't really know why, but it clearly animal health has gotten tougher on the little calves. And what's important, I think, is how the cattle perform compared to expectations, and if things turn out less bad than your expectations, you can be okay and everything. But no, it is a serious challenge, and for a variety, whatever reasons, it seems to have gotten worse. And I'm here from industry wide, and we're probably on our class. I'll put it this way: on our class of cattle, I know other people that will buy the same class of cattle, and we get along, at least as well or better than average. But it is not pretty. Yeah, Charlie.
Chris, you had your inputs too?
No, I typically do not, and such. And there are some operations, especially my size and larger, that would hedge things coming in. But no, it's normally just I buy them on the cash market. And typically, everything I buy is from people with long-term relationships and everything. Back when we were finishing cattle, it was a couple of local elevators or from farmers that I bought my grain. But I don't. But my size operation bigger. It's common to hedge inputs, but I typically do not. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just don't think the added complexity is going to benefit me any. And the hedging is really more of to mitigate risk, not I see something in the market and I want to go ahead and grab it. But it is an excellent tool for mitigating risk. So yeah. Yes.
Rich, two questions. Do you have a very particular niche that you're working in? Have you always done that? Or how did you arrive at working in that particular part of the market? And the second question is, do you have a vision for your ranch and operation? And if so, what is it?
Good enough. My dad's philosophy when I came back was to buy the cattle that were out of fashion. And back when everybody wanted the little short, squatty Herefords, Dad was buying the taller, stretchier ones because they were cheaper. And then when people went to the exotics, we went through a period that we had nothing on our place but blacks that were short and such. But it's essentially trying to buy something that cost less than it was worth, and probably for now it is because so many of the breeding has gone to black hided that even a lot of our cattle are black hided, but it's cattle that the hair coat's too long or too short or what have you. And there's a variation in size from 200 to 500 pounds in the load coming in. We sort the cattle at day 30, so they don't need to be uniform in size. So it was essentially the niche was trying to control costs and trying to buy something at a discount that would sell for close to even money. And when you're buying an animal, I tell people you buy an animal at $200 under the market. That doesn't mean you make an extra $200. You might have $170 of increased cost from reduced performance and reduced health issues and what have you, and reduced selling price, but you might try to net out a 30, and if somebody else bought him, those costs might be $230, so he'd come out behind on it. But our niche is to try to buy what's out of favor that would bring close to even money. And so the mission on the ranch, no, I've probably got another 15 years or so, and none of my children have any great interest in coming back. And like I said, my couple great nephews that they're growing up fast. One never knows. I'm not precluding anything from on down the road, but if the physical operation does not continue, I mean, it's not like for some reason that I had to have my operation go ahead and continue. So I will. I guess when I'm 6 feet under, I will let others make that decision. I have given some guidance, but I said, to avoid trying to hire a manager and have somebody run it. That tends to get more of an issue. But I don't know. I think I've got another 15, 20 years. I've got such fantastic employees, and just Paul. And unfortunately, Paul is 4 years older than I am, but been with you 35 years. But he's still going great, and got some other great employees. And until I lose my mind, if I don't have to be, I don't do 1/4 the physical work that I used to do, and so really, and if I couldn't get out of the house, the operation could go ahead and continue, and it can continue really until I kind of start losing my mind. And I am not any crazier now than I was 20 years ago. So I've been absent-minded ever since I was a little kid. So when I get Alzheimer's, they won't be able to diagnose it. So, yeah, go ahead. Anything else there?
Do you not have any nieces?
The niece is younger than the two great, than the two nephews. Now, Jane does have, I have 3 kids, and then there's 2 nephews, and they're both off doing something, and they're setting their career. And so, and my 3 grandchildren are 4 years old and 2-year-old twins, so it may be a while for that. And I should have been more inclusive. Jane does have 2 grandsons, no, 1, 2, 3, 3 grandsons and 2 granddaughters, and so I need to expand the range of who all might be coming on back, but also the boys. To try to dig myself out of this hole. The boys were older than the girls, so that's why it was not totally being sexist. It was that they were older. So one never knows, but that's going to be a ways off. Where they're 10 years old, so it'd be another 10 to 15 years before they could realistically start, coming on back would be the first opportunity. But we will just see what occurs on that. So and we're getting approaching the hour, Lynn. So whatever time you're in charge of the time, I saw Charlie Rail kind of shifting around his fact check deal there. So I didn't know if that was calling time or just fact check. So we can go on for another couple questions, or Lynn's got the right to take my mic away from me. Well, great. Thank you all very much.
Yes. Thank you, Rich. It's a great story, and it's one of many of our rancher stories that we've heard, and it's interesting because every single one of them is different. I saw Tom Moxley hidden here. He's one of our stories. Dr. Clausen is in the back, and he's shared some of our stories. I can't see any other of our ranchers here, but anyway, thank you, Rich. Really great, and well, a couple of things, I guess. Somebody that is similar to Rich, that is very community-minded, says that it's like doubling your bottom line, that it's doing well while doing good. And that is just really makes all the difference in the community. And speaking of doing well while doing good, our volunteers are just amazing, and they work very, very hard, and they put in their own resources. So following this is, of course, July is ice cream month, and so they like to, in the month of July, offer an ice cream social that they have totally funded. They say that way that if you make any donations, it doesn't have to go towards the cost of ice cream because they've taken care of that. So anything that you give today does go to support our mission of preserving the ranching heritage of the Flint Hills, and we do that in a variety of ways. Besides the Prairie Talks, their next big event is going to be the big one of the year, which is Day of the Cowboy. We're going to celebrate that 3 weeks from today, Saturday, July 27th. And it's going to be a great day. We're going to have Rich back again, unless your plans change, and Dr. Clausen and some others that will be sharing their family stories, along with, if you've got a family brand, we want you to bring your branding iron, or at least the brand on a design, because we want to capture those brands. We're going to burn them into wood, 100-year-old wood, of course, and so that they will be here, and we're going to capture those stories too. So please bring your brands back on the 27th, along with, we'll be doing some interviews. If you're a rancher and have been ranching and want to tell some good old cowboy stories, we're going to be interviewing, and Dave Leiker is going to be recording those stories for us. What else? We've got a mailing list. If you're not already on our email or snail mail, you'll get information from us right away. It's downstairs. Our volunteers can help you about that. And not always do our events get in the newspaper, and this is one that missed the Emporia newspaper somehow. So those of you that are here today, you heard it through social media or through some of the other papers that ran it, so, or through our mailing list. What else? Anything else about Pioneer Bluffs that you want to hear about? Well, we are thrilled to have such a nice big crowd and to help us enjoy Independence Day and all that it means and celebrates. And the ranch will be open in the granary, the red building. Besides the restrooms, you'll see a Ranching Heritage kiosk with some of our past stories out there, some interviews and some photos that Dave Leiker has taken about ranching. So it's a great place to do a little exploration. And in the house is open and you're welcome to wander around. We're kind of in a transition period on the house. We're trying to make it more into a 1900s home. And if you have any other questions, ask any of our volunteers. They're just the greatest. So one more thing from Rich.
Yeah, if I can. Talking about the mission here at Pioneer Bluffs, and I'd just like to recognize the person. Becky Jepson, can you stand up? And the director of the Emporia Community Foundation, just so you guys know where she's at. And that's fine, Becky. And that's fine, thank you. And the Emporia Community Foundation, that's a very cost-effective way to make donate. You can donate directly, Pioneer Bluffs, other charities, but there's some additional tax advantages and efficiencies through the community foundation. And over the last 15 years, I found huge joy in being able to make significant charitable contributions to a number of different things. And Pioneer Bluffs is an excellent resource. There's a huge number. Something I look at before I donate money is, are there a number of people giving their heart and soul to it? There is the Pioneer Bluff. You can see the people down there. And so, if people are considering on something of how can I help preserve the Flint Hills and the Flint Hills heritage, the Pioneer Bluffs would be something that, have their address and something to go ahead and consider. And Lynn didn't want to make quite this blatant of a sales pitch, but I thought I kind of would. And then both you can give directly, but also for Becky is here with the Emporia Community Foundation, if you wanted to chat with her about setting a fund up down there. But certainly this is one of the things, there's huge joy of when you hit the stage of life where I've got enough to retire, and how can we help something else. Pioneer Bluff is great.
Wow, can't ask for better than that. So thank you, Rich, very, very much.